Hello, all you beautiful people. We're back, episode 12 of What You Need to Know About Boxing. I'm your host, Phil Likes Fights, also known as Philip. Let's get into it. A lot to go over. I want to just start from the jump, say my apologies for not getting a video out last week. I think it is, obviously important to be consistent here. I do want to make that a priority. Going through a couple of life changes. If you care about my personal life, even a slight iota, I'm taking up dieting and exercise in ways that I have never really fully implemented in my life before, which is a big change to your physical chemistry, your mental chemistry. I'm only about just over a week now into it, and I already feel the effects. So that's part of it. Part of it also is scheduling. It's kind of hectic. It's my birthday is coming up the 11th. So there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of pieces, but always good to be in here in front of the camera, mic in front of me, talking about fights, and we have got plenty to talk about. Let's get right into it. Starting out with the new segment that I'm going to be introducing. This is sort of a going over what I may have missed from last week, or some news elements that aren't exactly fight breakdowns. So let's get into it. This is Hitting the Bag. So let's get into Hitting the Bag here. Number one, let's talk about Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney fight completely fell apart. So this happened pretty much last week. This was in development. One of the bigger stories I felt of that past week. Teofimo Lopez, Devin Haney was effectively agreed for a date, one of those Riyadh season cards. I believe August 12th was the date in question, although don't quote me on that, but I believe August 12th. Teofimo Lopez pulls out of the fight negotiations, goes on a Twitter tirade against Haney, against Turki Al-Sheikh, called him a dictator, but used more harsh language than even that, really went into him. According to Dan Raphael and others that have knowledge of the situation, they then began to try to remake the fight. Teofimo Lopez put out public apologies on Twitter about his comments. The fight looked like it was going to be able to be done and signed, and then he pulled out once again. So, what can you say about this? So, apparently one of the big reasons for this was they wanted to make the fight at a 144-pound catch weight. Now, Teofimo Lopez is world champion at 140 pounds. Devin Haney is campaigning, well, we don't really know, because his last fight was at 143-pound catch weight, I believe. But the idea is at least for him to move up to 147, given enough time. I understand that as a concern, but Teofimo Lopez cannot have it both ways, and let me explain. You cannot scream from the rooftops, I want a big fight. I'm being ignored. Nobody wants to fight me. I want money fights. I want to be a pay-per-view headliner. And then, the second that all of that falls into your lap, you have the brilliance of circumstance being that Ryan Garcia loses against Rolando Romero. So he's out of the running for the Devin Haney rematch. You have Haney coming off of a win where he looks very poor after a year layoff where he looked poor against Ryan Garcia. So we have a beatable version of Devin Haney coming off of a bad performance, and now Teofimo Lopez, who has already talked about moving up to welterweight to fight Jaron Boots Ennis, which that fight also fell apart in negotiations, but I understand. Everything is in the palm of your hand. You've got a big name in Devin Haney that you can beat. That would be a headliner. That you would actually be on pay-per-view, and you throw all of it away for no discernible reason. What is the next big fight for Teofimo Lopez? Is he going to unify at 140? That's unlikely, because I don't think he's fighting Richardson Hitchins. We already know that Subriel Matias is taking on Alberto Puello, so that's locked up. So who's the only other champion that's left at 140? That would be, let's see, so we have Teofimo Lopez, WBO. We have IBF being Richardson Hitchins, WBC is Pueo, WBO. Oh yeah, you're not going to fight Gary Antoine Russell. You're not going to be able to cross the street to PBC. So you're not unifying in your current division. What's the next biggest fight beyond Devin Haney? Completely ridiculous, but I mean, what can you say? Career sabotage. And don't worry, we're going to get to Keyshawn Davis's career sabotage later in the program, but had to go over this. But credit to Devin Haney for wanting a big fight like that. Hopefully they find something for him of a probably not equivalent size, but hopefully a fight of note. Also, Jaime Munguia tested positive following his rematch against Bruno Saras. I mean, at what point do we say that there is something with the Eddie Reynoso gym that is systemically infected with PED use? You know, one time, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me, Canelo Alvarez, Oscar Valdez, Jaime Munguia, Julio Rey Martinez. Fool me, Andy Ruiz. Fool me, Ryan Garcia. Fool me again. Shame on what? So that's shame on the Eddie Reynoso team. It's pretty apparent now that team consistently is having a performance-enhancing drug use problem. I mean, for anyone that wants to argue the contrary, I just don't think that you're looking at reality. Now, that's not to say that other gyms aren't using PED use. In fact, there's a gym over in the UK that I'm almost 100% convinced that they have systemic PED use problems, but they're able to get around it, and for some reason or another, the Reynoso gym is not. So hopefully that fight gets overturned. I don't believe, let me check as of right now. As of right now, I believe it's still a win for Jaime Munguia, but you have to imagine that following an, yes, as of right now, Jaime Munguia has that win, but you have to imagine that gets overturned to a no contest, or you're doing nothing but rewarding performance enhancement drugs in sports, which as a general rule, we shouldn't allow, right? So I had to go over that. Navarrete versus Charlie Suarez, now a no contest. So originally when I put out my video talking about this fight, and everyone said this is going to be a Suarez W, of course he won that fight. It's so obvious that the punch caused the cut. Even if those things can be true in retrospect, this was the correct decision. This was the decision that I called on the show, saying that it would be a no contest, provided that the result was overturned. And the WBO, Gustavo Oliveira, has said that they're going to order a rematch. So let's see that fight sometime later this year. You know, Navarrete, a very active fighter. Charlie Suarez, you know, stay in the gym, stay ready, because you got to grab onto that rematch opportunity with both hands. And I'll look forward to it because the first fight was pretty good. So glad to see that. I think the best possible outcome was achieved there. Finally, Ben Shalom's Boxer and Sky Sports have split ways. This is very interesting, of course, because now we're seeing, you know, Top Rank Boxing is having trouble with ESPN. Boxer is now split from Sky. You have some of these traditional TV networks, obviously Premier Boxing Champions, Showtime. I hope we don't get to the point where all of boxing is on, as Frank Warren used to say, the app. You know, I think DAZN is fine. The production value is fine. But, I mean, maybe network television is just dying across the board. I'm not going to sit here and declare that, oh, we need network television. I mean, I understand that we're in the world of streaming, but, you know, sometimes it sucks to see these things that at one time were massive. You know, there were some Sky Sport pay-per-views. Anthony Joshua versus Vladimir Klitschko, I believe. You had obviously Brooke Khan more recently. That was huge. You had Froch Groves. Some really big fights on that network. So, it sucks to see them go, but I'm curious where Boxer goes. Does Boxer, they already have the deal with Riyadh Season. Riyadh Season is using DAZN as their primary broadcaster. You have to imagine that would be next in the cards, but I'm curious to see if Shalom can find something else of note. I think they're still using Peacock Sports as the US broadcast, but that is also, I imagine, subject to change. But that's hitting the bag. Let's get into the show. And we're starting off with another favorite segment of mine. Oh, wait. Sorry. Hold on. Let me read. Yeah. Let's just go over the fights from the past weekend because I didn't do that. Right. That is first here. So Masanori Rikishi lost to Sugar Nunez. So Nunez, now the IBF World Super Featherweight titleist. It was a good performance. I think a lot of people have boogeyman-ified Sugar Nunez, and I'm not so sure that that performance supports a boogeyman status. He was good. He was active on the front foot, but Rikishi was landing in moments. You know, I think Nunez is going to be a tough out for anyone at 130 pounds, but I don't think that he is some sort of unheralded future best in the division by far. It was a good performance. Also, we had Bektimir Melikuziev and Darius Fulgham. And by the way, I predicted Nunez to win by knockout. He won by decision. Going on to this fight, Bektimir Melikuziev versus Darius Fulgham. I had predicted Melikuziev to win this fight by unanimous decision, and that he did with a extremely clutch 12th round knockdown to win the fight on all three cards, 114-112, if memory serves. This was an excellent fight. It's free on YouTube if you've not seen it. I know it's been a little bit now, but I would implore you, go back, give it a rewatch. Very fun scrap between two men that are now on the cusp of a world title. There's a WBA super middleweight eliminator. And yeah, just a great fight overall. I understand people saying that Fulgham won. It really was that close. But in a close fight like that, the guy that got the knockdown, I have no problem with him getting the nod there. Speaking of WBA super middleweight titles, Caleb Plant losing to Armando Resendiz. What do you even say beyond... Oh my goodness. What do you even say beyond Caleb Plant? I mean, this whole buildup for this fight was... Will Jamal Charlo, will he get through Thomas Lamana? Is he completely washed up? Meanwhile, Charlo completed his end of the deal and Plant could not, but there is always a pretty clear blueprint on Caleb Plant around pressure fighters like Canelo, like Benavidez. But you figured even if Resendiz is cut from that same cloth, he's campaigned at 160 pounds. He's lost to Elijah Garcia. He was never really seen as any sort of world beater. And both of these fights were supposed to be in the tune-up category. I mean, this is why both men were co-headlining instead of fighting one another. But Resendiz, with a really excellent win, I wouldn't mind seeing him against Bektimir Melikuziev next. I think that, according to the WBA rankings, both of them will be very highly ranked. If the rankings are updated, that's a good fight to look forward to. And I think now that Caleb Plant coming off of a loss, Jamal Charlo coming off of a win, I still think you actually make that fight, because the entire narrative when people were considering Caleb Plant to be the third or fourth best super middleweight in the world was, it doesn't matter what Jamal Charlo does, Caleb Plant is going to win in convincing fashion. Now, coming off of a really not great performance, he's beatable, and Jamal Charlo is still a 32-0 fighter. It's very interesting. I may actually pick Jamal Charlo in that fight, but I was one of the people that said that it was a competitive fight before these two had their tune-up bouts, so I would still look forward to it. They're both big names. They have personal beef. I wouldn't mind it as maybe a co-main event underneath a world title fight of significance. And then finally, Manuel Gallegos loses to Khalil Ko by knockout. Good performance by Khalil Ko. He really silenced the doubters, myself included. I didn't see how that fight was going to go any differently unless Ko could make significant changes to his gas tank manageability, and that he did. And that, I think, was the really big outcome, because past the fourth round, he was able to stay sharp, stay composed, and found a very nice win for himself. So good job there. But all right, that was from the weekend prior. Let's get into, finally, something very fun, which is, who's that fighter? You know him, you love him. Can you recognize this man? He's a real legend of the game and now recently retired Vasily Lomachenko. So let's get into it. You got to talk about the great Vasily Lomachenko. Now, I've been following boxing in a hardcore way since, honestly, the first fight card that I was watching live intently was Vasily Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez. That was, to me, my first real exposure to a somewhat big boxing night, a boxing fight of significance. Of course, it was for the almost undisputed titles at lightweight. And Lomachenko did not look his best in that fight. He was then very inactive. He came back against Nakatani. Then he had another comeback bout. He fought Jermaine Ortiz, which I went to in person. So I only ever caught Lomachenko on the tail end of his run. I think everything up to Jorge Linares is the Lomachenko that people are going to talk about for a very long time. And post Linares, I think, is a not different fighter, because that takes away a lot of credibility from very good people, but it's just not his prime. You know, having campaigned at 126 pounds, I don't think that he was ever really small for when he moved up to 130 or 135, but I also don't think he was ever a real unit for those weight classes. I think that part of his brilliance was that he was generally, if not undersized, at least underframed. Not exactly a person with the longest limbs, but just someone that, even though he's only had 21 fights in his pro career with 18-3 as his record, you have to think about how many of those fights were world title fights, right? So he had, I believe, he challenged for a world title in his second fight. Then he went on the run that he did. And then his non-title bouts were against Nakatani, Jermaine Ortiz, and Richard Comey. So in 21 fights, he had 17 world title fights. And in that, he lost 3 of them. So that's a record of 14-3 in world title fights. Just doing the math off the top of my head. I mean, it's very commendable. On top of the 2 gold medals in the Olympics, it seems like Lomachenko's legacy is one that is very divisive, especially in the online sphere. But I think if you get off the internet a little bit, which is hilarious for me to say, saying that I have an internet podcast and an online presence on Twitter. But if you do get off the internet, if you talk to people in and around boxing shows, if you go to them, Lomachenko is beloved, very beloved. Whenever I talk to casual boxing fans, he is one of the bigger names that a lot of people know about and hold in very high regard. I think he's always had a very fan-friendly style. I can't exactly recall I think every single fight of his career has been fun to watch, whether it was a win or a loss. I mean, arguably his worst fight to watch in his career was the Orlando Salido loss, arguably. But he's just someone that captured the public imagination for a time, went on such a great run throughout 3 divisions, was doing all of this. You know, we look at some fighters now like Andy Cruz, who was fighting this weekend as a guy in a couple of fights getting to world title opportunities. But it felt like Vasily Lomachenko was one of those fighters that, you know, obviously didn't fully break the mold on it, but really made the idea of capturing a world title in under 10 fights a lot more popular than I think it was previously seen. I mean, I can be wrong on that. I don't have that sort of historical framework that I could say I was there for all of this, but based on what you hear other people say, based on just recent trends, It seems like he was a pioneer in that sense. And no matter what you think of his losses in his career, if you think the loss to Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney proved that he wasn't able to win his biggest fights, which is a gigantic narrative, there's really no denying that he's a great fighter, a great champion, and someone that many fighters today are basing their style on. I think Bam Rodriguez, Virgil Ortiz, a lot of these young, up-and-coming, future pound-for-pound talents, you ask them in an interview, who's a big inspiration for you? Whose style would you love to emulate? And people say Lomachenko, the footwork, the activity, the defense inside the pocket. He's one of 3 fighters ever to have a better than a +20 plus-minus rating, which is just absurd. The other 2 are Floyd Mayweather and Shakur Stevenson, a defensive wizard with an aggressive style. There's a reason that for a time he really was must-watch TV, and you have to pay him his respect. So whatever he does next in life, all the best for him. Let's get into my predictions from the last week because I didn't put out a video. So before I break down all of the cards in the last weekend, let's just get into it. I thought Callum Simpson would win by knockout, as well as Wardley. I thought Abdullah Mason would win by knockout, as well as Opetaia and Nakatani. All of those events came true, for such a voluptuous weekend of boxing that we had this past weekend. I don't think it was particularly well match made, if that's the right way of going about saying that. I think it had a lot of potential, as I said, but, some of these fights, the writing really was on the wall, despite the volume of fights that we were being approached with. So let's just get into it. Fabio Wardley versus Justice Huni, a homecoming in Ipswich for Fabio Wardley against Justice Huni for the interim WBA World Heavyweight Championship. This is after Jarrell Miller had pulled out. Fabio Wardley finding an all-time comeback knockout in the 10th round to stop Justice Huni. Obviously, the fight did not go as what I would have said on the last program. I would have said that Fabio was getting boxed up in this fight badly. There is no other way to put it. Huni was on the front foot. The first 4 rounds, Wardley had success, but Huni was going to the body. He was getting in Wardley's face. He was landing good combinations, hooks around the guard. I think Huni got hurt a little bit in round 1, a little bit in maybe round 5, but nothing that ever seemed to stagger him too badly. And his boxing combinations, his cardio, there were people that are very big supporters of Fabio Wardley that come rounds 8 and 9 were saying, it's time to pull Fabio Wardley out of this fight. He's got nothing left. He looks defeated. To find the knockout shot that he did in the 10th round is just one of those all-time highlight reels that you can put up on any compilation. When people in boxing say the hack, I think this is a hack statement, by the way. If you analyze a fight and you're like, I'm going to do this, but anything can change with one punch. It's like so overblown. Everyone said that statement a million times. I'm sure even I'll say it. But he proved the mantra true. And sometimes the cliche comes to fruition. So really, one shot changed everything. I picked Wardley to win by knockout because Justice Huni has shown consistently systemic problems with his punch resistance. He cannot take big punishment without being severely compromised. And Fabio Wardley stayed in the fight. The other problem is with Justice Huni, look, if you're not going to have chin, if you're not going to have durability, you have to have power. You have to be able to get Wardley out of there because you let him linger way too long. If you're not going to have the chin, you got to stop him. Or, because all he had was speed and combinations. But if you're sitting there, speed combinations, you have to box a perfect fight. The second that you lose any concentration, the fight's over. And that's exactly what we saw. Crazy fight, crazy knockout, but a result that if you're just looking at it purely for what it was, I think makes a lot of sense. We'll see what happens next with Fabio Wardley. I think arguably the fight that makes the most sense is him fighting the winner of Kubrat Pulev and Michael Hunter, which is also a WBA eliminator of sorts. I imagine that would be next for Wardley's interim world title. Let's move on here. Actually, you know what? Let me see if I want to talk about anything on the undercard. I am sort of being main event centric here. Pierce O'Leary picked up a win over Liam Dillon, which was really not confidence inspiring considering that Dillon moved up 2 weight classes. Mike Perez with a nice knockout against Stephen Ward. The Albanian Nelson Haisa knocked out Patrick Corte. I imagine that Haisa will be back on the July 19th card in Wembley. Looking forward to that. And Sam Guiley with a draw against Gideon Oniani on the undercard that really spoiled Guiley's British title hopes. All right, let's go on here to this. Let me just compose myself for a second. I have to get composed here because I'm about to go nuclear. I am about to go nuclear. All right. So, in what was supposed to be Keyshawn Davis against Edwin De Los Santos, and an interesting and compelling matchup for his WBO lightweight title, we now have had a new main event, Abdullah Mason versus Jeremiah Nakatani. This is because Keyshawn Davis missed weight by 4.3 pounds, I believe, 139.3 or 139.4, just shy of 140. Did not even try to cut the weight, came into the weigh-in bone dry, said that he already knew he was moving up to 140 pounds anyway. They tried to make the fight still with a huge weight advantage. Meanwhile, this is the same Keyshawn... I can't believe this. This is the same Keyshawn Davis that went up against a Gustavo Lemos that came in overweight. And everyone, myself included, said, wow, Keyshawn, that's great. The fact that you're willing to take on this dangerous contender that nearly beat Richardson Hitchins, and you're going to take him even though he blew the weight because that's how confident you are in your skills. Man, this guy Keyshawn Davis, what a great champion in the making. How commendable is that? Now, shoe exactly on the other foot, you try to screw over Edwin De Los Santos, who is already coming into this fight in a well over a year layoff, hasn't fought since the Shakur Stevenson fight. You already have the ball in your court. It's in your hometown of Norfolk, Virginia, and you can't even make the weight, and you don't even try. Then, Samson Lukowicz, the promoter of Edwin De Los Santos, gets in the negotiations that even though they're not going through with the fight, they're still going to pay De Los Santos' purse in full. On top of that, because Keyshawn, the hometown star, is out of the fight, 10,000 Ticketmaster requests for a refund come through the system, and you have half as many people show up to the event because Abdullah Mason is not as big of a name and not from Norfolk. What a debacle. So you got to figure, wow, Keyshawn, you just ruined your stock. You don't have a world title anymore because the WBO stripped him for missing the weight. You don't have a fight. You're not going to be in front of your hometown fans. That must be it, right? That must be, wow, reputation tarnished. No, because on the undercard, Nahir Albright beats Keyshawn Davis's brother, Kelvin Davis, by I know it was a majority decision, which is, again, nonsense, but beats him up badly, makes your brother honestly look like an embarrassment. And then you and your other brother, Keon, have the gall to find him in the locker room in the back and jump him, leave him with a welt on his head, and get into another public scrap in the waiting area, tunnel area in the venue where you get the police involved because, again, you jumped the guy. You You were already an embarrassment and a joke this whole week, and then you pull that. And to think, myself, like many other people, were starting to go, man, isn't Keyshawn Davis such a breath of fresh air? Isn't this exactly what we need in American boxing? Someone with a great backstory, the fighting the addiction, the being in the mental home, the self-harm, the being in the mental home, everything, right? What a great backstory. Here he is, world champion. And you take all of that goodwill, all of that conjecture, and you take it like this. Hold on. You ready? You take it like this piece of paper, and you go, oh, great. Hey, you know how everyone was beginning to like me? Nope. Hey, remember how... Nope. Let's just tear everything that I did, all the hard work I did. I'm going to crumple it up, and then I'm going to throw it in the garbage. That's what you did. It's embarrassing. It is so embarrassing. How dare you? How dare you? This may be the absolute most just inflamed I have ever been talking about a topic on this show. How dare you? You wanted the Teofimo Lopez so badly that you decided to take on all of his tricks and gags and act like a joke yourself. So embarrassing. So what's next for Keyshawn Davis? I don't know. I guess he's moving up to 140 pounds, so I guess he's going to do that. What's there for him? I don't know. Is Top Rank even going to be his promoter? I don't know. All I know is Keyshawn Davis had such a good thing going for him and decided to just throw it all away because, I don't know, I guess he was bored. Pathetic. But let's go over the real main event that happened. Abdullah Mason stops Jeremiah Nakatia by the doctor coming in. You know, Nakatia said something very funny in the corner, which was, I am not okay, my friend, when his corner was asking him if they wanted to pull him out, which is very funny because I guess he just essentially quit. Good stuff by Mason. I mean, we've seen Nakatia get stopped a few times now by Raymond Murataya, by Ernesto Tito Mercado, who's also fighting this weekend. But Abdullah Mason is the number one in the WBO in the lightweight rankings. And now that that title is vacant, we're going to get a Top Rank special of, hey, we got a vacant WBO belt. We got one of our guys with a very highly ranked position in this organization. Let's maneuver him to that title shot. So I don't know if it would be next. I mean, Gustavo Oliveira has said on Twitter that Mason and Sam Noakes are the number 1 and number 2 contenders, so they're going to be ordered. But I'm not so sure if that fight comes to pass. But it's an interesting one. It really is. I think I would have favored Sam Noakes maybe a year or so ago, but he's been sort of inactive in very low-profile fights. And if Top Rank is willing to put Mason into a world title fight, I don't doubt that they're very confident that he would come out victorious. So if that happens next, so be it. Let me see if there's anything else on this undercard I want to get to. Obviously, I touched on Kelvin Davis losing to Nahir Albright. Great win by Nahir. Yuri Cedeno, the Dominican middleweight prospect, looked good. Troy Isley, I think, got very favorable scorecards against Itundi Michelle William. Very favorable scorecards. And Tiger Johnson against Boca Chica was a completely miserable watch. And he's got to change something up about his game because he needs to let his hands go more often. And I know that because they had the coach cam on the entire broadcast, and that's all he screamed all night. Let's move on here. Let's relax. Let's take a breath. Let's get into the next topic, that being an excellent performance. Junto Nakatani unifying the 118-pound title, becoming WBC and IBF world champion, stopping Ryosuke Nishida by causing a massive cut over the eye of Nishida where he could no longer continue. I think even though Nakatani has had fights go to a decision, this is arguably Nakatani's hardest fight to date. I mean, Nishida was giving him very good work. The pocket fighting that these two were putting on, head to head, literally head to head, looking for shots in close. Very respectable performance by Nishida. I think it's very fair that he was considered the second best bantamweight in the world coming into this fight. I still think that he's one of the best bantamweights, provided that Junto Nakatani fulfills his plan on vacating the titles and moving up a division. But even Nishida himself looked very drawn at the weight. I could see both men moving up to 122 pounds following this fight. But what else can you say about Junto Nakatani besides he's looking very special? Very special. There was just something about this fight where it was close, it was cagey, but then Nakatani said, actually, let me go into a third gear. Oh, hold on, Nishida. Oh, you can go into third gear? Here's fourth gear. Here's fifth gear. And he was able to do that in a way that Nishida just could not replicate. The uppercuts from Nakatani were exhilarating, Roy Jones-esque, the ability to put 3 and 4 of them together in swift combination. The one thing I've got to say, though, about a potential Nakatani-Inoue fight, I don't think that's an easy fight for either man, but Nakatani would come in with these wide, looping hooks. Now, maybe this is something that they specifically prepared for against Nishida when studying tape, but if you throw a long, looping hook against Inoue, the way that he was throwing it, I think Inoue catches you and puts you out. Now, again, Nakatani, I think he's going to have no problems at 122 pounds. The man is massive. He's so long. He's going to be able to fill out into these upcoming weight classes, I think, quite successfully. I mean, I would even not have a problem Junto Nakatani against Inoue at 126 pounds. I have no problem with that. I think Nakatani will be 130-pounder or bigger by the time he retires. The man's massive, and he's got the skill to get him through those divisions. So what a great fight. Was a credit to watch. On the undercard, though, you had Tenshin Nasukawa, I think one of the biggest stars in Japan right now, right behind Naoya Inoue. Had a very mature and composed performance. I think he's in position now to fight for world titles, and I think he is ready. I think he's only, what is he, 6-0 as a pro? Let's double check for the sake of being correct. We have Tenshin Nasukawa now 7-0. Yes, now only 7-0, but at 26 years of age, following a 40-plus win kickboxing career, I think he's a generational fighter. I do. How many prospects at 7-0 look this good against credible opposition in his last few fights? I was very impressed by this. Good on Tenshin Nasukawa for, I think, having proper development. You know, in his first 3 or 4 fights, people said, I don't know, is this kid really going to go on to be world champ? And I think he's just a kickboxer. No, he's developing very nicely. I also have to give a shout out here to Riku Masuda that knocked out Michel Banquez in 1 round with a nasty counter hook, I believe. That was a great shot. And also now 2-0 prospect Tomoya Suboi, who's, I believe, 29 years of age, so he's got to move along fast. He took on Van Thao Tran of Vietnam, who was an 18-1 veteran against the guy 1-0, and Suboi looked very good. So, great card over there in Japan. Again, it's on ESPN Plus. If you have access to that and you want to rewatch the event, very good stuff. Let's move on here to Jai Opetaia versus Squeo. Let's see. What was this guy's? I can't even be bothered to remember. Claudio Squeo from Italy. I mean, the man weighed in 191 pounds for a cruiserweight world title fight. He's not even a big cruiserweight. Opetaia had basically no trouble in there. The far bigger physical specimen controlled him for 4 rounds, knocked him out in the 5th. Apparently he broke Squeo's jaw. Basically the first big punch that Squeo got hit with, he went down. An embarrassing fight. The fact that this was on Australia Fox Sport pay-per-view. I mean, these Australians, they make them pay for all kinds of insane, crazy pay-per-views that, I don't know, maybe Australians are just rich or something. But, I mean, I wouldn't want to have to pay for this on pay-per-view. The only good news is that hopefully Zurdo Ramirez wins on the Jake Paul undercard in a much tougher fight, by the way. And if that happens, hopefully they unify for 3 belts later in the year. That's basically the only upside. What else am I really supposed to say? I wish that they would have done the Hussein Sin Cara fight. Sin Cara, I think, would have had a much better performance than Squeo. I mean, this was a joke of a fight, but I guess they wanted to keep Opetaia out. It's crazy, right? Opetaia goes from fighting really good opposition, basically the Myris Bradis fights, and then the other fights that they give him are just like, come on, man. But that's how they're going to move him. That's how they're going to position him. It's understandable, even if it is a little bit disappointing. Also on the undercard, we had, Connor Wallace. Picked up a nice win over Dylan Collin, I suppose. I mean, wasn't really that great of a win, but something to throw in there. He's very highly rated. Let's move on. Callum Simpson versus Ivan Zucco for the European title. Now, Zucco is an Italian fighter I've been following for a very long time now. He's been on that European circuit for a significant amount of time. 21 wins, 18 knockouts coming into this. And in the first round, he put Callum Simpson down bad. Or no, the first round, it was more of a flash knockdown. But it was in that third round where Zucco found another knockdown that you start to go, is he actually going to do it? Is he going to stop Callum Simpson? But Callum Simpson, too big, too much output. That was really the thing that I focused in on. So much volume, crowded Ivan Zucco, held him into the corner of the cage or the corner of the ring there. Just ripped off combinations, and Zucco could not match that level of output, that level of intensity. Callum Simpson winning by knockout in the 10th round, I believe. In a good performance, considering that this was a guy that actually came to fight. This was someone with a real record, someone that had real pedigree. This wasn't a hit like his last opponent. Who was that guy? Oh, goodness. Callum Simpson's this wasn't an Elvis Agora. This was a real fighter. So credit to Callum Simpson. He says he wants to do things the traditional way. He's gone from Commonwealth to British titles, now European. And let's see if he defends this European title or what his next move is. But it was a very entertaining fight. And I think Callum Simpson, for however long he's going to be undefeated, will be in very entertaining fights. Also on the undercard, Mark Jeffers loses to Sean Hemphill. This was it was a pretty good fight, a very good fight actually. But I was surprised that they gave this fight to Sean Hemphill, being the B-side from America. Mark Jeffers fighting on his own promoter's show. I figured in a fight this close, they're not going to give it to Hemphill, but they did by majority decision. Hemphill, if you remember, was on a PBC undercard against William School in a very low output, low intensity fight. So the fact that in this fight, both men let their hands go, let the fists fly, it was a very fun fight to watch. And Hemphill with arguably the biggest win of his career. So good stuff there. Mark Jeffers, you should have, he should have fought Callum Simpson, but apparently that was never going to happen. But you should have even tried to fight Aslis Iglesias, but now you're out of that running. There. All right. Let's get into... Okay. Yeah, it's all right. Let's get into it for the fights upcoming this weekend. Richardson Hitchins taking on George Kambosos. That's right. George Kambosos, when he beat Teofimo Lopez at MSG, made himself more money than 99% of fighters that have ever put on the gloves. It is incredible what George Kambosos has done from one win over Teofimo Lopez. he has gone from, let's see here. Let's just spell it out. Okay? George Kambosos, whose best wins were split decisions over Mickey Bay and Lee Selby before Teofimo Lopez, went on to, after that fight, get 2 fights back-to-back with Devin Haney. Had that win over Maxie Hughes that was very sketch. Then got a hometown fight against Vasily Lomachenko. Then gets a lucrative deal with Matchroom Boxing, and he gets another homecoming against Jake Wiley, where he wins there. Now he's up at 140 pounds, taking on Richardson Hitchins. And look, Hitchins, I know people give him a lot of flack for how he fights, but if you were anything other than very impressed against how he fought Liam Paro, I don't know what to tell you. Look, a guy is allowed to not be maybe your cup of tea, but it's hard to not deny when someone has a real skill set. I mean, that was exposed a little bit in that Gustavo Lemos fight, but Lemos was a tricky fighter. He was an undefeated 30-0 guy that there wasn't a lot of tape on. This is different. I think George Kambosos, I think this is the last big one. I don't know. Unless Madison Square Garden George Kambosos is some new mythical fighter and he finds the punch from the gods to knock out Richardson Hitchins, I don't see how he wins this fight whatsoever. Honestly, wait, no. This isn't the last big fight for Kambosos. I think if Kambosos loses in the way that I think he will, which I think Richardson Hitchins will find shots to the body to stop him in the 9th round, Lomachenko was able to find as much. I think he'll fight Liam Paro because they're both Australians with Matchroom and that whole Gold Coast promotional deal. So I think he would get himself into a Liam Paro fight. But this is, I think, the last world title shot for George Kambosos. But I expect Richardson Hitchins to... If Richardson Hitchins does not dominate this fight, that'll be a terrible look. Terrible. You have to dominate George Kambosos at this point. Kambosos, I mean, he's had trouble with the weight at 135, but he's clearly not that big. He doesn't have a big frame. Hitchins, very big. The other thing is, I don't know how much longer he's going to want to fight and defend this title, considering that the IBF puts that weight clause on him. We'll see about that. But, yeah, I expect Hitchins' domination. Now, moving on here, we've got Andy Cruz taking on what's this guy's first name again? Hironori Mishiro for an IBF final eliminator. I'm not expecting much here. I think Andy Cruz is going to be better than this level. I mean, maybe Mishiro is going to really upset the apple cart. I don't see it. I've seen a little bit of tape on this guy, and I think Andy Cruz is just too good at this point. You're going to have to get him in there with a Raymond Murataya, which would be next, provided that he wins. I think he'll find a stoppage around the 7th round. I think he'll, especially with all of the drama around Keyshawn Davis, and now his name is in the news cycle, I think he's going to want to be very impressive and say, hey, look at me. Keyshawn's disappointing, but I'm not. I'm always better than that guy. So you have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder there. I think he'll find the stoppage. And you also have Tito Mercado taking on, this isn't even on BoxRec. Yeah, Jonathan Montrell. I mean, Tito Mercado, I think, is one of the best prospects in the sport, regardless of weight. It's arguable that he's more of a contender now. I expect him to win by stoppage inside of 4 rounds. I think he is very, very good. Undercard, full of Matchroom prospects. You have Terra Moana Jr., you have Zaquan Moses, and the debut of Adam Massa that apparently should be one to watch. So that's you there. That's pretty much the big fight night of the week, but there are a couple of small cards I'm going to give a little bit of time to here. Firstly, 2 legends are coming back this weekend. Juan Francisco Estrada and Nonito Donaire. So Estrada is taking on Karim Arce Lugo. And I think Estrada will knock him out. Now, look, it could be the case of Estrada's getting up there in age. I mean, let's double check how old this guy is, right? Let's see. Estrada is 35. I understand he's coming off of the loss to Jesse Rodriguez, but I think Bam is several levels above this opponent here. Any Mexican from Los Mochis, Sinaloa, I think for some reason that one area of Mexico in particular tends to produce actually really respectable fighters that tend to pull up an upset every now and again, but I don't see it here. Even in the Bam Rodriguez fight, Estrada made a good account of himself, knocked down Bam, which nobody else has been able to do as of yet. So I'm going to pick him to win by stoppage, but that's not because I think Estrada is in peak form, much like this Nonito Donaire fight. So I don't think Donaire should be back. I don't. I think he's far too old. He's at 118 pounds. I don't really support guys that say they're retired and then come back. He's been out of the ring since he has been out of the ring for the same amount of time that Errol Spence has been out of the ring. Just wrap that through your head. But his opponent, Andres Campos, I saw him lose to Sonny Edwards on the same night as Teofimo Lopez versus Josh Taylor. Campos, a kind of pressure fighter, but sloppy offense, not a lot of power. Recently got stopped against another contender. And he's not even a real bantamweight. Donaire is very large for bantamweight. I imagine he'll be arguably maybe his career largest. Campos occupies really 112, 115. I think Donaire will find the knockout. He is one of the hardest hitting small men of the last 20 years, without a doubt. So I have that there, but much like Estrada, I don't think either men are really back or have big title hopes in their futures. I will pick against them, I think, in their next fights, but I imagine that they'll both win these. I think that these matchups are very winnable. Also, there's actually a fight night happening over in Ghana being promoted by Amir Khan, which is very interesting. Andrew Tabiti is back. So Andrew Tabiti, very interesting. Of course, he had a very close fight with Justice Huni, which, not the worst look in hindsight now, I suppose. But I expect that he's going to win over Dixon. Dixon knocked out in one round against Albert Ramirez. I expect Tabiti to find the KO. He's actually pretty good. And he's only 35, which at this weight class is not too bad. Brandon Glanton is already back from his loss against Chris Billum-Smith, taking on an opponent that's been knocked out 3 times before, up there in age. Even though Glanton's coming off of a pretty intense physical fight, I expect him to find the knockout. And O'Hara Davies, also back on this card. I think he's going to pick up a confidence-boosting unanimous decision win. And I think with all that being said here, that is everything. So thank you all for watching episode 12 of What You Need to Know About Boxing. I should be back this time-ish next week, hopefully, to talk about Richardson Hitchins beating George Kambosos. And if I'm on here next week talking about how Kambosos found the win, man, that is going to be incredible. But all right, I will see you all next time. Bye.